There are two things that you should never do in life. The first is to get on the bad side of the Mafia crime syndicate. This is the tragic tale of Debbie, a woman who found herself in a world of trouble after she crossed paths with the Mafia, and when they took away her precious daughter, she knew that there was no way out of this situation. It was a beautiful day out, and the sun was shining. The birds were singing, and the flowers were blooming. Life was good, and Debbie was feeling grateful for everything she had. They had been waiting for her, and they knew exactly who she was. She could hear the men shouting and screaming behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She just kept driving until she reached her home, where she locked herself inside. But she knew that wouldn't keep her safe for long. She had to find a way to fight back against the Mafia and their threats. And she knew just how to do it. Debbie decided to go to the police. She paced back and forth in her house, unable to relax or enjoy the protection of the police. She kept wondering if the Mafia would come back, and if they would succeed in their threats. The tension was unbearable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Just when she started to think that the worst had passed, the doorbell rang. She froze in fear. Could it be the Mafia? Her heart started racing, and she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. A witness finally came forward with information. They had seen someone leaving Debbie's house on the night of her murder. The police were ecstatic. They finally had a lead, and they were determined to follow it up. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking conspiracy. The people in town had given up hope of justice being served. They felt like the killer would never be caught, and that Debbie's death would be in vain. But the police were still determined to find the killer. They continued to work on the case, hoping that one day they would get a break. And in the end, they did. Will use anyone and anything to get what they want, even their own family members. She knew that they were her best chance of fighting back against the Mafia. The whole thing was a cover-up. The Mafia had framed an innocent person, a person who had nothing to do with Debbie's death. The police were outraged. The town was in shock. The killer had been among them all along, and they hadn't even known it. They mourned for Debbie and hoped that her family could find peace. The case was finally closed, but the scars it left on the town would never fade. They had been so close to solving the case, and now it looked like it would never be solved. But they weren't giving up. They were determined to find the real killer and bring them to justice. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was the same group of men from before, the ones who had threatened her and her family. Debbie's mind raced. What were they doing here? Had the police failed to protect her? Was the Mafia back to finish what they started? He had been a part of it all, and he was willing to spill the beans. The police were overjoyed. They finally had the information they needed to solve the case. They arrested the killer and brought them to justice. Fearful, she backed away from the door and quickly dialed 911. But she was also scared. She knew that the police were often corrupt and that the Mafia had a long reach. Still, she knew she had to try. The Mafia had kept their promise, and now she was dead. The police were shocked. How could this have happened? They had been there just hours before. Had they missed something? Who could have sent the Mafia after Debbie? As they investigated further, they uncovered a web of deceit and corruption. The men would be back, and when they did, she would have to do something drastic to protect herself and her family. He had leaked information about Debbie's every move, and the Mafia had used it to their advantage. The police were stumped, and the killer was still out there. The people in town were starting to lose hope. They felt like the killer would never be caught, and that justice would never be served. But the police weren't giving up. They were determined to find the killer, no matter how long it took. They continued to follow up on every lead, no matter how small, hoping that it would lead them to the person responsible for Debbie's death. With this new information, the police were determined to bring the killer to justice. They launched a full-scale investigation, questioning everyone who had come into contact with Debbie. They were desperate to find a lead, anything that could help them catch the killer. But the trail was cold, and the leads were few and far between. But what? One of the men stepped forward and blocked her path. Debbie's heart started racing. She knew she was in trouble. The man leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She froze in shock. He had threatened her and her family. She knew she had to do something, but what? As she drove along the winding roads, she couldn't help but smile. She was happy to be alive and even happier to be returning home to her family. She had to fight back against the Mafia and their threats. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to do whatever it took to protect her family and herself. She was scared, but she was also angry. Angry at the Mafia for threatening her and her loved ones. She was angry at herself for letting them get so close. Most of all, she was angry at the world for not protecting her. But little did she know that this would be the last normal day of her life. She tried to do whatever she could to save her daughter, but it was too late. She told them about the Mafia and their threats, about the men in black suits, and what they had said to her. The police were skeptical, but they took her seriously enough to send a few officers to protect her home. They told her to stay inside and not come out until they gave her the all clear. Debbie agreed, but she couldn't help but worry. Were the police really going to protect her, or were they just playing along to make her feel safe? And in the end, she got framed for a crime that she didn't commit. But why? Why did the Mafia target Debbie in the first place? What did she do to deserve such a fate? Because if they want to make an example out of you, there's nothing that can stop them from doing so. Oh, they will use anyone and anything to get what they want, even their own family members. In fact, the following story proves this point perfectly. Well, let me tell you, to understand why the Mafia targeted Debbie, we have to go back to where it all began. You see, the story of Debbie and the Mafia started long before she ever even met them. They were dressed in black suits, and their faces were hard and menacing. Debbie's heart skipped a beat. She knew in her gut that these were no ordinary men. Something about them just didn't feel right. Despite her instincts telling her to keep driving, curiosity got the better of her and she slowed down. As she passed by, she couldn't help but steal a quick glance at them. That split-second decision would change her life forever. It was a classic case of being in the wrong place at the right time. Debbie was just an ordinary woman, living an ordinary life in an ordinary town. She had a loving husband and a beautiful daughter named Lucy. Life was good, and she couldn't have asked for anything more. That was until one fateful day when everything changed. One day, Debbie was driving home from the grocery store. She rounded a corner. She saw a group of men standing by the side of the road. The men saw Debbie, and their eyes lit up. In a panic, Debbie floored it and sped away. Debbie was a kind-hearted woman and didn't want to hurt anyone, but she knew that in this situation, she had no other choice. But anger doesn't solve anything. Debbie knew that if she wanted to protect her family, she had to take action. When the police finally arrived at her house, she told them everything. As the hours passed, Debbie grew more and more anxious. Debbie slowly approached the door and peeked through the peephole. When the police finally arrived, they found Debbie's body lying on the floor. She had been brutally murdered. It turned out that one of the officers assigned to protect Debbie had been in cahoots with the Mafia all along. Days turned into weeks, then months, but the case remained unsolved. Then, just when all hope seemed to be lost, a breakthrough came. It turned out that the witness had been paid off by the Mafia to lie about what they had seen. Months went by and the investigation went nowhere. One day, a former member of the Mafia came forward with information. He knew who the real killer was. But it was too late for Debbie. She had been killed, and there was no way to bring her back. So remember, if you cross the Mafia, there's nothing they won't do to get back at you.